The morning inspection at Buckingham Palace was always conducted with military precision. Sergeant Major Harrison walked slowly down the line of guards, his experienced eyes checking every detail of their immaculate uniforms. Each red tunic had to be perfectly pressed, every button polished to mere brightness. And no unauthorized items were permitted on the ceremonial dress. But for the past 3 months, Guardsman David Chen had been hiding something that would cost him his career. If discovered, tucked carefully inside his uniform, positioned where it could not be seen by inspectors, but where he could feel its presence against his chest, was a small military badge that had no business being there. The badge was not from the British Army. It was a faded purple ribbon with a silver star, the kind awarded to soldiers from another country in another time. To anyone in authority, it would appear to be a violation of regulations, a foreign decoration worn without permission. But to David, it represented something far more sacred than any rulebook could contain. David stood at attention as sergeant. Major Harrison approached his position in the line. His heart pounded against the hidden badge, but his face remained perfectly composed. 3 months of carrying this secret had taught him to control every muscle, every expression, every hint that might reveal what he was hiding. "Morning, Chen," the sergeant major said, his voice crisp and professional. His eyes scanned David's uniform with the thoroughness of someone who had been conducting inspections for 20 years. "Everything in order?" "Yes, Sergeant Major David," replied, his voice steady despite the anxiety churning in his stomach. The badge pressed against his chest felt heavier than its actual weight. As if the metal itself carried the gravity of the promise he was keeping, Harrison's inspection moved. On to the next guard, leaving David to exhale slowly through his nose. Another morning survived. Another day he could honor the vow he had made to his dying grandfather. 3 months ago, the secret had begun in a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and approaching death. David's grandfather, Li Wei Chen, had been a soldier before anyone, and the family knew him as the quiet man who ran a small restaurant in London's Chinatown. For 60 years, he had kept his military service hidden, never speaking of the wars he had fought or the medals he had earned. But as death approached, Li Wei had called David to his bedside with urgent whispers about something hidden in the restaurant's basement, something that needed to be protected and honored even if it could never be displayed publicly. "In the old country I served with honor," Li Wei had whispered, his frail hand gripping David's with surprising strength. "But when I came to England, I thought it better to forget, to become only what people expected me to be. Now I see this was wrong." David had listened as his grandfather's story poured out in broken fragments. Li Wei had fought in the Chinese Civil War, had been decorated for bravery in battles whose names David barely recognized. But when he fled to Hong Kong and eventually to London, he had buried his military identity so completely that even David's father had never known the truth. "I have a medal," Li Wei continued, his voice growing weaker, "hidden all these years. It represents the men who died beside me, the promises we made to each other. I should have honored it properly, but I was afraid of questions, afraid of being seen as foreign, afraid of not belonging." David had wanted to reassure his grandfather that none of that mattered, that his service deserved recognition regardless of where or when it had taken place. But Li Wei was not finished with his confession. "You wear the British uniform with pride," the old man had said, his eyes focusing intently on David's face. "You serve the crown with honor, but you also carry my blood, my history. I need you to promise me something." The promise Li Wei had extracted from his grandson was simple, but profound. David would carry the hidden medal with him every day he wore his Guard uniform, honoring both his British service and his Chinese heritage. It would remain secret, visible to no one, but it would ensure that Li Wei's military service was never forgotten again. Now, 3 months later, David stood guard at the palace gates, carrying the weight of that promise. Every morning, he carefully positioned the small badge inside his uniform, and every evening he removed it with the reverence of someone handling a sacred relic. The other guards had no idea why David had become more serious or contemplative over the past few months. They attributed his change in demeanor to natural maturation, the way young soldiers often grew more thoughtful as they gained experience. None of them suspected that their colleague was carrying a piece of military history from another army. Another war, another lifetime, during quiet moments at his post. David would sometimes think about the irony of his situation. Here he stood, representing the British military tradition, while secretly honoring Chinese military service. To anyone who discovered his badge, it would appear to be a betrayal of loyalty. But to David, it felt like the most honest thing he had ever done. His grandfather's restaurant had closed permanently 2 weeks after the funeral. David had spent an entire weekend in the basement, going through boxes of photographs and documents that revealed the full extent of Li Wei's hidden past. Military commendations written in Chinese characters that David could not read. Photographs of young soldiers who had probably died decades ago. Letters from comrades whose fates would never be known. The medal itself was more elaborate than David had expected. It's not just a simple badge, but a carefully crafted piece of military art that spoke of a nation's gratitude for exceptional service. It had been wrapped in rice paper and stored in a wooden box that showed signs of having been handled frequently over the years. The weight of keeping his grandfather's secret began to affect David in ways he had not anticipated. During his off-duty hours, he found himself researching Chinese military history, trying to understand the context of Li Wei's service and the significance of the medal he now carried. What he discovered in dusty library books and online military archives painted a picture of his grandfather that was completely different from the quiet restaurant owner he had known. Li Wei had been part of an elite unit that had fought against impossible odds during some of the most brutal battles of the Chinese Civil War. The medal David wore was not just a token of participation, but recognition for extraordinary courage. Under fire, the more David learned, the more conflicted he became. His grandfather had been a genuine war hero, someone whose bravery deserved public recognition and respect. Yet here David was, hiding that legacy inside his British uniform, unable to share the truth with anyone who might understand its significance. During morning briefings, when the guards were reminded about the importance of maintaining proper uniform standards and avoiding unauthorized additions to their dress, David felt a stab of guilt. But it was always followed immediately by a stronger feeling of duty to his grandfather's memory and the promise he had made. The closest he came to discovery was during a surprise inspection by Colonel Matthews, the regiment's commanding officer. David had been standing guard at the main gate when the colonel appeared unexpectedly, conducting one of his random uniform checks that kept all the guards on their toes. "Good morning, Guardsman Chen," Colonel Matthews said, his sharp eyes scanning David's appearance with military thoroughness. "How are you finding your duties here at the palace?" "You're rewarding, sir," David replied, fighting the urge to adjust. His position. The badge felt like it was burning against his chest. Surely visible somehow, despite being completely hidden beneath layers of fabric and leather, Colonel Matthews stepped closer, and David was certain his secret was about to be exposed. But the colonel was studying his face, not his uniform. "You've seemed more focused lately, more mature in your approach to duty. The other officers have noticed. Good to see a young soldier taking his responsibilities seriously." The praise should have made David proud, but instead it deepened his internal conflict. His improved performance was directly connected to carrying his grandfather's medal, drawing strength and purpose from that hidden connection to military service. But he could never explain this to his superiors without revealing his violation of regulations. After the colonel moved on, David remained at his post, thinking about the complexity of his situation. He was being recognized for excellence that came from honoring a promise that could destroy his career if discovered. The irony was both inspiring and terrifying. During his lunch break, David often visited a small Chinese community center near the palace. The elderly men who gathered there to play chess and drink tea reminded him of his grandfather, though none of them knew about Li Wei's military background. David had considered confiding in them, seeking advice about his dilemma, but something held him back. One afternoon, while watching two old men play Shang-Chi, David overheard a conversation that stopped him cold. One of the players was telling the other about his father, who had served in the Chinese army during the Civil War, but had never received proper recognition for his service. "He fought bravely," the man said, moving his pieces with careful deliberation. But when he came to England, he felt he had to hide that part of his life. Now he is gone, and no one remembers what he sacrificed for his country. The similarity to his grandfather's story was startling. David realized that Li Wei was probably not the only Chinese veteran who had hidden his military service after immigrating to Britain. How many other families carried similar secrets? How many other medals were hidden away, gathering dust instead of receiving the honor they deserved? That evening, David returned to his small flat and carefully removed his grandfather's medal from his uniform. He held it up to the light, studying the intricate details he had memorized over the past months. The silver star caught the lamplight, and for a moment David could almost imagine his young grandfather wearing it proudly on his Chinese army uniform. But that image was immediately replaced by the reality of his current situation. Here was British soldier, sworn to serve the crown, carrying a foreign military decoration in violation of explicit regulations. No matter how honorable his intentions, no matter how much the medal meant to his family's history, he was technically in breach of military discipline. David set the medal on his small dining table and stared at it for a long time. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to put it away in a drawer and honor his grandfather's memory in some other way. He could visit the grave more often, could preserve Li Wei's photographs and documents, could even research Chinese military history as a hobby. But none of those alternatives would fulfill the specific promise he had made. His grandfather had not asked for occasional remembrance or academic study. He had asked David to carry the medal with him every day, to ensure that his military service was never again forgotten or hidden. The phone rang, interrupting David's contemplation. It was his mother, calling from the family home where she was still dealing with Li Wei's affairs. "David, I found something else in your grandfather's things," she said, her voice filled with curiosity. "A letter addressed to you, dated just a week before he died. He must have written it when he knew you were coming to visit." David's heart raced. Another piece of his grandfather's legacy, another insight into the mind of the man whose secret he was carrying. What does it say? His mother paused before reading aloud. "My dear grandson, if you are reading this, then you have already made your choice about the medal. I know this decision is not easy for you. You serve with honor in your British uniform, and I am proud of that service. But I also need you to know that carrying my medal does not make you less British. It makes you more complete." The letter continued with Li Wei's reflections on identity, service, and the ways that honoring one's heritage could strengthen rather than weaken one's current commitments. Reading those words, David felt his grandfather's wisdom reaching across death to guide him through this moral complexity. Winter brought new challenges for David, as the palace routines shifted and the guard schedules became more demanding. The cold weather required additional layers of clothing, which made concealing his grandfather's medal more difficult, but also provided better coverage. Each morning became a careful calculation of positioning and padding to ensure the badge remained invisible while still fulfilling his promise. During one particularly frigid December morning, David was standing guard. When a group of Chinese tourists approached the palace gates, they were elderly people, probably visiting London to see their grandchildren who had settled in Britain, as they took photographs and marveled at the ceremony. David heard them speaking in Mandarin about the guards and the tradition they represented. An elderly woman in the group caught David's attention. She was studying his face with unusual intensity, and when their eyes met, she smiled in a way that suggested recognition. After the group moved on, David wondered if she had somehow sensed his Chinese heritage, or if his guilt about the hidden medal was making him imagine connections that did not exist. That afternoon, during the changing of the guard ceremony, David performed his duties with extra precision. The crowds were larger than usual, despite the cold weather, and the ceremony had additional significance, as foreign dignitaries were visiting the palace. Every movement had to be perfect, every aspect of their appearance beyond reproach. As the ceremony concluded, David noticed the same elderly Chinese woman from the morning standing near the barriers. She was watching him specifically, not the general spectacle of the guard change. When the ceremony ended and the guards began to file away, she approached the barrier and spoke to him in accented English. "Excuse me, young man," she said quietly, But I wanted to tell you that your grandfather would be very proud to see you serving with such honor." David's blood ran cold. There was no way this stranger could know about Li Wei, about the medal, about any of his family history. But the woman's words carried a certainty that suggested she knew exactly what she was talking about. "I am sorry, madam, but I think you have me confused with someone else," David replied carefully, maintaining his formal posture even though the ceremony was over. The woman smiled gently and shook her head. "I knew your grandfather during the war, young man. Li Wei Chen was my brother's closest friend in their unit. When I saw your face this morning, I recognized the family resemblance immediately. He wrote to me about his grandson, who joined the British Army. He was very proud of you." David felt the world shifting around him. This woman represented a connection to his grandfather's military past that he had never imagined existed. She was proof that Li Wei's service had been real, significant, and remembered by others who had shared those experiences. "My name is Mrs. Li Wang," the elderly woman continued. "Your grandfather saved my brother's life twice during the fighting. They made promises to each other about remembering their service and honoring their fallen comrades. I suspect you know something about the promises your grandfather made." The conversation was taking place in full view of other guards and palace staff, so David had to be careful about how he responded. But Mrs. Wang seemed to understand the delicacy of the situation. "Perhaps we could speak privately sometime," she suggested. "I have photographs and letters from those days. Things your grandfather might have wanted you to see." David arranged to meet Mrs. Wang at a tea shop near Chinatown the following weekend. The intervening days passed slowly as he wondered what new revelations awaited him about Li Wei's hidden past when they finally met. Mrs. Wang brought a small photo album filled with pictures David had never seen. Young Chinese soldiers in uniform, including several clear photos of Li Wei wearing his medal along with other decorations. The images showed his grandfather as David had never imagined him, confident, proud, surrounded by comrades who obviously respected and trusted him. "Your grandfather was not just a good soldier," Mrs. Wang explained as they looked through the photographs. "He was a leader, someone the other men looked to for guidance and courage. This medal you carry, because I know you carry it, I can see it in how you stand, how you move. It represents not just his individual bravery, but his commitment to his men." David was startled by her perception. "How can you possibly know what I carry?" Mrs. Wang smiled knowingly. "Because I carry my husband's medal in the same way, hidden where no one can see it, but close enough to feel its presence every day. Do this not because we are ashamed, but because the world is not always ready to understand the complexity of our loyalties." She reached into her purse and showed David a small pin tucked inside a hidden pocket. It was different from Li Wei's medal, but clearly from the same period, the same army, the same forgotten war. "I worked for the British government for 30 years, Mrs. Wang continued. "I served this country faithfully and was proud to do so. But I also never forgot where I came from or the people who shaped me before I arrived here. Carrying my husband's medal reminds me that I can honor both my past and my present." This revelation changed everything for David. He was not alone in his struggle to balance competing loyalties and honor multiple identities. Mrs. Wang represented proof that it was possible to serve Britain faithfully while still maintaining connection to Chinese heritage and military history. "Does anyone else know?" David asked quietly. "A few of us," Mrs. Wang replied. "Chinese veterans and their families who settled in Britain after the war. We have learned to be discreet, but we support each other in keeping these memories alive. Your grandfather was part of our informal network, though he was always more worried than the rest of us about discovery." She went on to explain that there were perhaps a dozen families in London who carried similar secrets, finding their own ways to honor Chinese military service while building new lives in Britain. Some kept medals in their homes, others visited Chinese military memorials during private moments. And a few, like David and Mrs. Wang, carried physical reminders with them daily. "What you are doing takes courage," Mrs. Wang said as their meeting concluded. "Not just the courage to risk your career, but the courage to insist that your full identity deserves recognition, even if that recognition must remain private." David, left the tea shop feeling less isolated but also more aware of the broader implications of his choice. He was not just honoring his grandfather's individual request, but participating in a quiet form of cultural preservation that connected him. Two other families facing similar challenges. Spring brought unexpected challenges when David learned that his unit would be participating in a special ceremony honoring Commonwealth veterans. The event would include extensive media coverage, detailed uniform inspections, and close interaction with veterans from various conflicts. The increased scrutiny made carrying his grandfather's medal more dangerous than ever. 3 days before the ceremony, Sergeant Major Harrison called David into his office for what he described as a routine performance review. But as David sat, across from the man who had been watching him closely for months, he sensed that this conversation might be more significant than a standard evaluation. "Chen, you have been one of our most reliable guards this year," Harrison began, reviewing David's file with careful attention. "Your discipline has been exemplary, your appearance consistently outstanding, and other guards look to you as an example. That is why I want to discuss something that has been concerning me." David's heart began racing, but he maintained his composed expression. "Yes, Sergeant Major?" Harrison leaned forward slightly, his experienced eyes studying David's face. "Over the past few months, I have noticed subtle changes in your demeanor. Nothing wrong, mind you, but different. You seem to be carrying something extra, some additional weight of responsibility. As your senior officer, I need to understand what is driving these changes." The question was broad enough that David could have deflected it in several ways, but something in Harrison's tone suggested genuine concern rather than suspicion. David made a calculated decision to share part of the truth without revealing his secret. "My grandfather died several months ago, Sergeant Major. He was the person who inspired me to join the military. His passing has made me think more seriously about what it means to serve with honor and to carry forward the values that previous generations fought to preserve." Harrison nodded sympathetically. Loss can definitely affect a soldier's perspective on duty and service. "Was your grandfather military?" This was the dangerous territory David had been hoping to avoid. "He served during wartime, yes, but he rarely spoke about it. I have been learning more about his experiences since his death, trying to understand the sacrifices his generation made." "That is commendable," Harrison replied. "Understanding our military heritage, even when it comes from family members who served in other armies, can deepen our appreciation for what we do here. Many of our best guards come from families with complex military histories." The phrase "other armies" hung in the air between them. David wondered if Harrison somehow suspected the truth, or if he was simply acknowledging the multicultural reality of modern British military service. Either way, his response suggested an openness that David had not expected. The conversation concluded with Harrison recommending David for additional leadership responsibilities. But David left the office more anxious than ever. The sergeant major's perceptiveness and his specific mention of other armies suggested that David's secret might not be as well hidden as he had hoped. 2 days later, while preparing for the Commonwealth Veterans Ceremony, David received an unexpected visitor at his barracks. Mrs. Wong appeared during visiting hours, carrying a small wrapped package and wearing an expression of urgent concern. "I have been thinking about our conversation," she said without preamble, "about the ceremony this weekend and the risks you will be taking. I brought you something that might help." The package contained a thin silk liner that could be sewn into the inside of his uniform jacket. "This belonged to my husband," Mrs. Wong explained. "It is designed to create a smooth surface that makes any hidden items completely invisible, even under the closest inspection. He used it during his later military service, when he needed to carry personal items without detection." David was amazed by the practical ingenuity of the solution, but also troubled by the implication that others had faced similar challenges. "How many people have had to hide parts of themselves this way?" "More than you might imagine," Mrs. Wong replied sadly. "Not all of them military medals. Some carry religious items, others family photographs, still others small reminders of homelands they can never openly acknowledge. The need to honor private loyalties while maintaining public roles is more common than society admits." She went on to explain that during her decades working in government service, she had encountered numerous colleagues who carried similar hidden connections to their heritage. British citizens of Irish descent who quietly honored family members who had fought against British rule. Scottish civil servants who privately commemorated clan histories that conflicted with official narratives. Jewish government workers who maintained religious practices that they felt might affect their career advancement if widely known. The tragedy is not that people carry these secrets, Mrs. Wong continued, but that they feel they must be secrets at all. A truly confident society would find ways to honor the complexity of its citizens' identities rather than forcing them to choose between competing loyalties. David used Mrs. Wang's silk liner during the Commonwealth Veterans Ceremony, and it worked perfectly. His grandfather's medal remained completely undetectable, despite multiple inspections and close media photography. But the ceremony itself presented David with new emotional challenges as he watched elderly veterans from various Commonwealth nations receive recognition for their service. During the event, David found himself standing guard while a group of Chinese-British veterans were honored for their service in British forces during World War II. These men had fought for Britain while maintaining their Chinese identity, serving as translators, intelligence officers, and support personnel in the Pacific Theater. Watching these veterans receive public recognition for service that combined British and Chinese elements, David felt a complex mixture of pride and frustration. His grandfather had served with equal courage and dedication, but in a different army, during a different conflict. The accident of history and politics meant that Li Wei's service would never receive similar acknowledgement, despite being equally worthy of honor. After the ceremony, one of the Chinese-British veterans approached David's position. The elderly man studied David's face with the same recognition that Mrs. Wong had shown months earlier. "You remind me of soldiers I knew during the war," the veteran said quietly. "Men who carried the burden of serving two cultures, two sets of values, two different concepts of honor. It is not easy, but it can make you a better soldier if you let it." The veteran's words stayed with David long after the ceremony ended. For the first time, he began to see his situation not as a conflict between competing loyalties, but as an opportunity to embody a more complex and complete form of service. The summer months brought an unexpected development that would test David's commitment to his grandfather's promise in ways he had never anticipated. The palace announced plans for a special exhibition celebrating the diverse military heritage of Commonwealth and Allied forces throughout British history. The display would include uniforms, medals, and personal artifacts from soldiers who had served alongside British forces in various conflicts. David learned about the exhibition during a morning briefing, and his initial reaction was excitement. Here was an opportunity for military artifacts like his grandfather's medal to receive proper recognition and honor. But as more details emerged, David realized that participating in the exhibition would require revealing secrets that his family had kept hidden for decades. The exhibition organizers were specifically seeking contributions from military families with connections to Chinese forces that had cooperated with British units during World War II and other conflicts. They wanted to tell the story of multinational cooperation and shared sacrifice that had often been overlooked in traditional military histories. David spent several sleepless nights considering whether to approach the exhibition organizers about his grandfather's medal and military records. The opportunity to finally give Li Wei's service the recognition it deserved was tempting. But it would also mean exposing the fact that David had been carrying a forbidden badge for nearly a year. During this period of internal struggle, David received unexpected support from Guardsman Michael O'Brien, his closest friend in the unit. O'Brien had noticed David's increasing preoccupation and finally confronted him about it during their off-duty hours. "Something has been eating at you for months, mate," O'Brien said directly. "Whatever it is, keeping it bottled up is not doing you any good? Maybe talking about it would help?" David had been so focused on maintaining his secret that he had not considered the possibility of confiding in a fellow guard. But O'Brien's genuine concern and their years of friendship gave David the courage to share at least part of his burden. "My grandfather was a war hero," David began carefully. but not in the British Army. He served with distinction in forces that fought alongside the Allies. But his service has never been officially recognized. I have been struggling with how to honor his memory while still fulfilling my duties here." O'Brien listened thoughtfully as David explained the general outline of his dilemma without revealing the specific details of the hidden medal. When David finished, his friend's response surprised him. "My own grandfather faced something similar," O'Brien said quietly. "He served in the Irish Republican Army before joining British forces during World War II. The family never talked about it because they were afraid people would question his loyalty to Britain. But he was proud of both parts of his service, and I think he should have been." This revelation opened a conversation that lasted several hours, during which both young men discussed the complexity of military heritage in families with complicated national identities. O'Brien's understanding and support gave David the emotional strength he needed to make a difficult decision about the exhibition. The next morning, David requested a private meeting with Colonel Matthews, the regimental commanding officer. He had decided to reveal his secret, accept whatever consequences followed, and offer his grandfather's medal for inclusion in the exhibition. Colonel Matthews received David in his office with the formal courtesy that marked all his interactions with junior personnel. David had prepared a careful explanation that emphasized his grandfather's service record, the historical significance of his military decorations, and the potential value of including Chinese allied forces in the exhibition. Narrative: "Sir, I have information about a Chinese veteran whose service alongside British forces might be relevant to the upcoming military heritage exhibition," David began, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. Colonel Matthews listened attentively. As David provided an overview of Li Wei's military background, his immigration to Britain, and his decision to hide his war record from his new community, David presented copies of his grandfather's service documents, photographs from his military unit, and testimonial letters from comrades who had survived the war. "This is remarkable documentation," Colonel Matthews said, studying the materials with obvious interest. "Your grandfather's unit apparently worked closely with British intelligence services during several key operations. His medals represent significant contributions to Allied victory in the Pacific theater." David took a deep breath before revealing the most difficult part of his story. "Sir, there is one additional matter I need to discuss. My grandfather made me promise to honor his service in a specific way, and I have been fulfilling that promise in a manner that violates uniform regulations." He explained about the hidden medal, the daily ritual of carrying it with his guard uniform, and the personal significance of maintaining that connection to his grandfather's military legacy. David accepted full responsibility for his breach of regulations and offered to face whatever disciplinary action was appropriate. Colonel Matthews listened to this confession without interruption, his expression remaining neutral throughout David's explanation. When David finished speaking, the office fell silent, except for the distant sounds of military activity outside the windows. "Guardsman Chen," Colonel Matthews finally said, "you have presented me with a complex situation that requires careful consideration. Your violation of uniform regulations is clear and cannot be overlooked. However, the circumstances behind that violation reveal a dedication to honoring military service that is exemplary." Even if misguided, the colonel stood and walked to his window, looking out at the palace grounds where David and his fellow guards performed their daily duties. "The irony of your situation is that you have been carrying a piece of military history that deserves recognition, but you have been forced to hide it because of the very regulations designed to maintain military dignity." He turned back to face David with an expression that seemed to combine official seriousness with personal understanding. "I am going to make an unusual decision in your case. Instead of disciplinary action, I am going to recommend your grandfather's story and his military decorations for special inclusion in the Heritage Exhibition. Your personal connection to this history makes you uniquely qualified to help tell his story properly." David was stunned by this unexpected response. He had prepared for court-martial, dismissal from the guard unit, or at minimum serious disciplinary action. Instead, he was being offered the opportunity to honor his grandfather's service publicly and officially. However, Colonel Matthews continued, "This decision comes with conditions. You will work directly with the exhibition curators to ensure that your grandfather's story is told accurately and completely. You will also help develop protocols for other military families who may have similar hidden histories that deserve recognition. The meeting concluded with David being assigned a temporary duty with the exhibition planning committee, where his knowledge of his grandfather's service and his personal experience with the challenges of honoring complex military heritage would contribute to a more inclusive and comprehensive display. The months leading up to the exhibition opening were transformative for David in ways he had never imagined possible. Working with museum curators and military historians, he helped develop a comprehensive display about Chinese forces that had fought alongside British units during World War II and other conflicts. His grandfather's medal became the centerpiece of a section dedicated to hidden heroes, Allied forces in British military history, but the most profound change came from the response to the exhibition's call for contributions from other families with similar stories. David's courage in coming forward had inspired dozens of other military families to share their own hidden histories, creating a collection of artifacts and stories that painted a much more complex picture of British military heritage than anyone had expected. Mrs. Wong was among the first to contact the exhibition organizers, offering her husband's medals and photographs for display. She also connected the curators with other Chinese-British families who had preserved military artifacts and documents from the Civil War period. What had begun as David's individual struggle to honor his grandfather became a community effort. To reclaim forgotten military legacies, the Irish community responded as well. Families like O'Brien's contributing materials about relatives who had served in multiple armies throughout their military careers. Scottish families shared Highland Regiment artifacts that had been kept private due to political sensitivities. Jewish families offered items from relatives who had served in various European resistance movements before immigrating to Britain. Each contribution revealed another layer of the complexity that David had been experiencing personally. British military heritage, it turned out, was much more multicultural and politically nuanced than official histories had ever acknowledged. The exhibition was becoming a celebration of how people with divided loyalties had found ways to serve Britain. While maintaining connections to their cultural origins, David found himself serving as an unofficial liaison between the exhibition organizers and these diverse military families. His personal experience with hiding and then revealing his grandfather's service made him uniquely qualified to understand the emotional challenges that other families faced in sharing their stories. One particularly moving contribution came from the family of a former Indian Army officer who had served with British forces during the independence period. The man's son had been carrying his father's medals secretly for 20 years, afraid that displaying them publicly might be seen as celebrating colonialism or betraying Indian independence. "I thought I was the only person dealing with this kind of conflict," the son told David during one of their planning meetings. "Learning that there are others who have struggled with similar questions about loyalty and heritage has made me feel less alone and less ashamed." As the exhibition opening approached, David was assigned to give guided tours to military dignitaries and veteran groups. This responsibility required him to become expert, not just in his grandfather's story, but in the broader narrative of multicultural military service that the exhibition was documenting. The night before the public opening, David stood alone in the exhibition hall, looking at the display case that contained his grandfather's medal. The small piece of metal that he had carried secretly for over a year was now illuminated by professional museum lighting, accompanied by detailed explanations of Li Wei's military service and historical context about Chinese allied forces. Next to his grandfather's display was a photograph of David in his Guard uniform, the caption explaining how the discovery of hidden family military history had led to the broader exhibition. The image showed him standing at attention at Buckingham Palace. But now viewers would understand that beneath his British uniform was a heart connected to Chinese military heritage as well. The official opening ceremony was attended by senior military officers, government officials, and veterans from dozens of different conflicts and countries. David was asked to speak about his experience, discovering his grandfather's hidden service, and his decision to honor that legacy despite regulatory obstacles. "For months, I carried my grandfather's medal in secret, thinking I was violating military regulations," David told the assembled audience. What I learned is that I was actually fulfilling the deepest purpose of military service, honoring those who came before us and ensuring their sacrifices are never forgotten. His speech continued with reflections on the complexity of modern military identity and the importance of recognizing that loyalty to Britain could coexist with pride and heritage from other nations and other armies. My grandfather taught me that true military honor lies not in choosing between competing identities, but in finding ways to serve with integrity while maintaining connection to all the influences that shaped you. Carrying his medal made me a better British soldier, not a compromised one. After the ceremony, David was approached by young military personnel from various ethnic backgrounds who thanked him for creating space to discuss their own complex relationships with military heritage and national identity. Several mentioned that they had family artifacts or stories similar to his grandfather's that they had never known. How to honor appropriately. Colonel Matthews took David aside during the reception following the ceremony. Guardsman Chen, your courage in revealing your situation has created something much larger than either of us anticipated. The Ministry of Defense is considering policy changes that would allow service members to request permission to carry meaningful family, military artifacts under specific circumstances. This potential policy change represented validation of everything David had struggled with during his months of secret medal carrying. Future soldiers might not have to choose between honoring their heritage and following regulations, thanks to the precedent his case had established. 6 months after the exhibition opened, David received a letter from a young Chinese-British woman who had just enlisted in the Royal Navy. She wrote that seeing his grandfather's medal in the museum had given her courage to discuss her own family's military history during her enlistment. Interviews rather than hiding it as previous generations had done. Your grandfather's story and your courage in telling it helped me understand that my Chinese heritage makes me a more complete British sailor, not a divided one, she wrote. I will carry that understanding with me throughout my military career. Kept this letter in the same wooden box where his grandfather's medal had been hidden for so many years. But now the box sat openly on his dresser, no longer a repository for secrets, but a collection of meaningful memories that connected past service to present commitment. On the first anniversary of the exhibition opening, David was promoted to Lance Corporal and assigned additional responsibilities, training new guards about military heritage and tradition. His unique experience bridging different military cultures made him particularly effective at helping young soldiers understand the complexity and dignity of military service in a multicultural society. Standing at his guard post one morning, exactly 2 years after he had first hidden his grandfather's medal beneath his uniform, David reflected on how profoundly his understanding of service and identity had evolved. The scared young man who had worried about violating regulations had become a confident soldier who understood that true military honor required embracing complexity rather than avoiding it. His grandfather's promise had been kept, but in ways that Li Wei could never have imagined. The medal was no longer hidden but celebrated. Service was no longer secret but honored. And the story was no longer shameful but inspiring to others facing similar challenges. David still felt his grandfather's presence during quiet moments at his post, but now it was the presence of a man whose legacy had been restored to its proper place in military history. Thanks to one grandson's courage to carry a forbidden badge until it could finally be worn with pride,